All, this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed, and we are in our cafe. Let's start looking at the questions that you had, and then we'll do the other chit chats as well. So, here are the questions, and great questions. So, first, what do you know about the use of methylene blue protectivity? So, this is, let me see, this is the one 10 days ago. So, last week we didn't have the chit chat, so it is kind of an older one. So, methylene blue. I'm going to open up a few studies. This is a study about methylene blue and the target on the mitochondria. This is 2020. Then here is a study also from June 2020. Here is a study. I totally not like this new way of PMC scrolling. But anyways, this is also another one. This was, what is the information? This is 2020 as well. Then there are some that are older. For example, this is 2015. And then this one is 2012. So generally, can methylene blue help? Yes. So in the animal models, what they have seen is, and this is so fascinating, the basic problem for dementia-like problems in the brain is that, so let's say here is a neuron. Let me see if I can make a big neuron. This is how I draw actually. And then I kind of fix these later. So let's say this is the neuron. So this is the neuron cell body. These little here are dendroids, and this long nerve is the axon, right? Now, within this cell body, of course, neurons are very, very functional things. All of our cells are functional, but neurons too. And so let's say there is a nucleus in the center or somewhere in the cell, and nucleus is continuously functioning. And what is the function that is happening? The function is that nucleus continues to open genes that would help make some messenger RNA, which will get out of the nucleus, and that would work with some ribosome, and it would make some protein. And this is happening all the time. Now, because this production of the messenger RNA, opening up of the genes, closing of the genes, then the production of the proteins, this whole assembly, the whole factory with the rest. So imagine nucleus being a library with the recipes and the books in there. So you send a message inside and you say, I want to make more dopamine. And then the librarians go and find the gene that has a recipe for dopamine. They open up that gene, they make a copy of that, create messenger RNA, send it out. And right outside the doors of this little brain are the factories installed that are making the proteins. They would pick up that recipe and they will use that to make a protein. And that protein will be then released in the cytoplasm. So because this whole extra activity thing is going on, the mitochondria co-locate in this area too. They concentrate around the nucleus so that they can provide energy for all the functions that are happening. Right? So mitochondria are present here. And their function is to just keep giving energy. And for that, what are they doing? They are using oxygen and they are using various metabolites, and they are finally creating ATP. And that ATP is being used everywhere. In this process, of course, they produce reactive oxygen species as well. And we've done this discussion before, I think a couple of years ago. So ROS are generated. Now, if the ROS are too many, or if there is a problem with other balances within the cell, the mitochondria itself can start getting damaged and start becoming dysfunctioning. And the reactive oxygen species can become so runaway within the mitochondria. Normally what happens is Mitochondria does a very tight control over the production of the reactive oxygen species and usage of them, but sometimes they can get, they can be lost from that chain of electron chain that is working. The result is these are little welders that would torch anything that is in front of them. So they would damage the mitochondria, then they would get out, they would damage the cellular organelle, then they would go near the cell membranes, even damage them. They can even end up killing the cells. So it is important that we have reactive oxygen species management so that the mitochondrial health is not deteriorated. And for that, they found out that methylene blue is a great mitochondrial protective agent from reactive oxygen species in the brain. That is its beauty. So now and then one more thing. When a functional part of our cell, any cell, becomes disrupted, and the cell notices that, and the cell says, can I fix this issue? And the cell cannot fix it. The result of that is that cell says, fine, I'm going to die. I'm going to commit apoptosis. And there is a complex mechanism. There are proteins called ubiquitins. They go and mark the damaged parts of the cell. Then the caspases, another set of proteins, they become activated, and the caspases then start destruction of the cell. And finally, the cell just dies. And that is apoptosis. Now imagine apoptosis of a neuron saying, well, I don't seem to be working correctly. I'm going to kill myself. Now we lost a neuron. We do not want to lose neurons unless these are in the areas where we can have neurogenesis. And not all areas have neurogenesis. That means it is really important to protect a brain from reactive oxygen species. And methylene blue is one such product. So it also protects from apoptosis as well. It also protects the cell from dying. So now with that, so this is a great question. Whose question was it? Lisbeth, awesome question. So if you see here, neuroprotective action of methylene blue and its derivatives. So methylene blue and mitigates reactive free radical production and provides neuroprotection in HT22 cells against glutamate. So these are various cells lines that they have. So this is one. Then protection against neurodegeneration with low dose methylene blue and near infrared light. So near infrared light and methylene blue. So if you would like, the team here, I can do a complete separate lecture about the role of methylene blue and the dementia or neuroprotection. So this is another one, mitochondria as a target for neuroprotection role of methylene blue and photobiomodulation. So not only just the methylene blue, but infrared light can help as well. The question is, how do you get that in the brain? Mitochondria as a target for neuroprotection, role of methylene blue and photobiomodulation. And then I shared this one as well. So this is first question. Then, do you expect another seasonal wave of COVID this fall? So we are seeing a record rise in the cases again. So if I go to our world in data, so we are seeing the rise. So that means we can see the rise. Again, this rise compared to the previous waves, at least this wave in the January, the Omicron wave. This is also an Omicron wave that is now, but it is not as big. Previous waves were kind of in similar line. Still, the thing that I keep saying, this rise, the problem with more cases is long COVID. Right? So even the study that I discussed today from Tim Spector and his team, they were saying near the end of their paper, they were saying that even when there is not a lot of long COVID that is caused compared to Delta, that is caused by Omicron, there's still the sheer number of cases because of Omicron have caused lots of long COVID. So that is what is the downside of this. And those, I think that those who are repeatedly infected do run a risk of developing long COVID. and I have been repeatedly infected as well, so I include myself. The important thing is to see the um, severity and deaths, and I did that discussion, and thankfully Paul reached out and he said, how about we do a stats discussion next Thursday? So we'll have Paul Bork with us, and we will talk about the stats once more as well. So Paul, thank you so much for that. So here, this is US and the number of deaths compared to where we were before. So let's say here, US 7 point, this is February 4, 7.72 deaths per million, 7 days rolling average. Compare that to, that was February, right? So this is July 1, so almost 4 months later. US is, on June 29th, it was 1.08, so 7 times lesser almost. So as long as the hospitalizations, death rates stay low, this virus and these peaks would eventually go away. And this would just become a normal human coronavirus, which causes yearly common cold. It doesn't cause flu, that is a different virus, but it would cause common cold. And my repeated exposures, if these are repeated exposures, this exposure that I just had a week or so ago, where I became very tired and I had joint pains and muscle fatigue and sleep problems. I didn't develop cough this time. I just had the runny nose, but I did develop fatigue and lethargy, and I still have some memory of that. So is that becoming long COVID? Will I get another exposure and develop long COVID for sure? These are the kind of risks that we are looking at. And some of you have asked me that have I used IVM or not, or vitamin D. So I'm so bad, I have not touched anything. I know now you're going to yell at me, but that's what I've done. So we'll see. I think that there are going to be more cases, but I also think that hopefully the severity towards ICU, hospitalization, and death would continue to reduce. And if that is the case, then this virus is now mutating towards becoming more and more friendly. Okay, SK says, so Melly66A, thank you very much. Good question. SK says, what would be a better clinical endpoint than antibody titers for future vaccine trials? That is a beautiful question. And I think that the protection of our mucous membranes will be a great idea, whichever way it is. It the antibody IgA protection, or it is the protection by, let's say, nanobodies, or other mechanisms of creating immune cells, B cells and T cells that can be then on our sero or mucous membranes. I think that would be a great area to target instead of trying to produce antibodies throughout the body. So that, I think, is a now the question is, there is a concept in immunology that our body tries to create more memory cells where it was exposed. So if our respiratory system or our mucous membranes are exposed to a pathogen, then our body tries to make more immune cells in those areas and tries to make more IgA based cells, or the cells that class switch quickly towards IgA and start making more IgA, compared to, let's say, if you have intramuscular injection, which would create the antibodies, or the antigen would be presented to the muscle and the immune system there, which would go to the local lymph node, which will make more IgG type antibodies instead of IgA. So IgA type antibody production would be a better idea, in my opinion. Also, there is a unfortunate thing that you cannot train the innate arm. There has been no, so I know that there are certain folks who claim that they can train the innate arm. Innate arm cannot be trained. It can be reprogrammed a little bit. It cannot be trained. It doesn't have any memory systems on it. You can add more innate arm cells, or you can hope to have this training, but that's really not powerful. So any ways to improve our innate arms capability to respond better and faster will be a great idea. So this is a very good question, SK. Um, Anna says, I know the wax can cause myocarditis, pericarditis, but can it also cause a heart murmur? Is it dangerous to have a murmur? Thank you. So, good question. So, I'm going to come to the live side 1 second. Doug, I see your questions. So, let me just answer this one and I'll be over. So, here, Anna, whose question was this? Anna. So, very good question. So, murmur. Let's use a chamber of the heart. So, let's say this is a ventricle, one chamber. So heart has four chambers, right? So right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Right ventricle is where Dr. Zelenko had the tumor uh, develop again, previously he had in the lungs. Okay, so here, let's say this left ventricle is here. Now every chamber of the heart has an input, that is where, that is the path from which the blood comes in, and then it has an output, so from where the blood goes out. So for example, left ventricle will have the right atrium, left atrium pumping or conduiting the blood to go in the left ventricle. Then when the left ventricle would contract, it would push the blood out through aorta, right? Now, murmur occurs, okay, let me back up for 1 more second. These chambers have a very interesting way of working. So, what happens is, imagine there is blood here in the left ventricle. This blood would come to left ventricle from our lungs. So, this blood would pour into the left ventricle from the left atrium. Did I say left ventricle before? This is left atrium. So from left atrium, the blood would pour into left ventricle, and the blood comes in the left atrium from the lungs. Once the left atrium has pushed the blood in the left ventricle, then what happens is there is a door, there is a valve that would close. There's a valve that would close here. So that is a atrioventricular valve. The point of doing that closure is that now this ventricle is going to squeeze, and we don't want the blood to go back in the atria. We want the blood to go towards the aorta now. And so what would happen is this valve would close, this door would close, and the other door towards the aorta would open up. This door would open up. So the blood that was collected in the ventricle will then eject in the aorta. So once the blood has ejected, or we know that a specific amount gets ejected. So let's say if there is 100 milliliter of the blood, normally 50, 60 milliliter gets out. So ejection fraction is the amount of the blood that gets ejected at the end of a systole compared to the end diastolic volume. That is the ejection fraction. And so usually 50, 60, then if you do exercises or running and blah, then it can increase. But normally that's where we are. So that is the amount of blood that gets out of the heart. Now we don't want that blood. Do you know something funny that happens? Murmur is such a huge topic, but it's a beautiful topic. And I love cardiovascular system as well. So what happens is, as the blood is pumped out, heart is very rapidly squeezing the blood to say, get out of here. And so that blood cannot become distributed in the body right away. Heart will have to wait for a long time. Instead, what happens is the aorta kind of swells up like a balloon and captures that exiting blood in it. Aorta is an elastic artery. And this is why in the older age, when it starts reducing its elasticity, it becomes a problem, because now the heart is pumping against a less elastic artery, and heart is having trouble and becoming bigger, or problems occur. So once the aorta has received this chunk of blood, then We don't want this blood to fall back in the ventricle. So what happens is the valve, the aortic valves that are between the aorta and the ventricle, they close shut. And now this blood cannot go back. The only way to move is for this blood to move forward towards the body. Now, why did I do all of this? If imagine while the blood is moving and some door is closed where the blood should not go, if there is a tiny bit of a opening there, then what would happen is the blood would rush back through that little opening. So let's say the valves are partially closed. And this happens in all of us as we age, that our valves closure is not as accurate. And so be- from that partially closed valve, when the blood rushes a little bit back, then there is this sound, zzz, and you can hear that from stethoscope. This is just one reason of the murmur. Similarly, there can be blood that can drop back from the aortic valves, for example, and you can hear that sound. Then it is possible that imagine between the two chambers, let's say the chambers are separated from each other, right? And this is, for example, this is interventricular septum. That is a wall between the two ventricle. Sometimes people have a tiny hole over here, and that can cause the jet of blood from one side to go to the other side. Now, your question was, can murmur occur because of myopericarditis? Yes. How? Not pericarditis, but myocarditis. Why? If the inflammation and cardiac damage, for example, occurs near a valvular area and causes the ring of the valve to become disrupted, that may cause the valve to not close correctly, and a murmur can occur. Similarly, if there is a slight damage in the heart wall that allows some blood to start leaking towards the other chamber, then that can cause murmur as well. But normally that would be a big deal if it happens in adults. But this is possible that near the valve, if there is some inflammation which causes the valve to become kind of more flaccid and a little more open, or the ring to become a little more loose, then there can be a murmur. This is a huge science. And on drbean.com, if you're buying Dr. Bean, I think if you really want to enjoy, there are two systems that I did with all my might, two or three, other than immunology. Cardiovascular system, I did a lot of, um, I did it with lots of love. Respiratory system, and the neurology. These three, in addition to uh, micro immunology. Although I am planning to redo the immunology, these are older lectures, their concepts are still valid, but I was on the blackboard and I was younger and I had even thicker accent, so I'm thinking of redoing them. Okay, so that was a good question. Now let's see. Here I had seen a question from so many folks. So let's start. I'm going to go to question by Doug, and there I'm sure there are questions before and after. Okay. Doug says, question, if nanobodies bind only 2 to 3 peptides, how can that be specific enough, especially to not bind to self? Correct. So it is possible that there are 2 to 3 or 4 peptides, and their trick is going to be to find those epitopes that are more unique in spike protein compared to humans, our system. Otherwise, there'll be more mimicry and we can end up with the damage. And that is what they have to understand in trials and testing. This is what they were saying, that, hey, we've seen them to be safe. Good, nanobody itself may be safe, but the binding region that is going to be attacking the spike, can that attack us as well? That still needs to be seen. So very good question. And I saw that question from Paul yesterday in a similar line. So yes. Texas says, KoolBeens lecture light. Doug Gross for your question. So sorry, 3 Qs are sufficiently fine. I was just trying to plow through the questions that were on the post. Let's see. There is a question from Danilo as well. Sir, when SCOV2 fuses to the cell, viral membrane get attached into the plasma membrane. Now the plasma membrane having spike, is it possible that NK cells identify spikes and kill the whole cell? So the um, yes, and this cell is going to get killed most of the time, because even if it is those little tiny spikes that are on the membrane of this little virus, which are, so you are asking a beautiful question. Nobody asked me this question through the 2 years. So what you're saying is this, and so here is a cell. De Niro, you should be given an award for this question. Here is a cell, and here is the virus, and virus has the spikes on it. And then you are saying that once the virus becomes fused, so there are, for SARS-CoV-2 there are two routes of entry. One is the whole virus going in, and the other one is the cell membrane becoming fused with our cell membrane, and the genetic material going in the cell. So you are correct that if it becomes fused, which it does, with our cell membrane, it has the tiny spikes on it. You're correct. And yes, NK cells can look at that and say, what the heck is this? What is this patchwork in this cell? And they can catch the cell and they can try to kill it. This cell is in trouble anyways, because it's going to make more spike proteins that are going to go become exposed. And that is also going to put the cell in trouble. Good question. It tickled my mechanism nerve. Okay, I'm going to go to the end and once again start looking upwards. So that's a good one. Be a half llama, yes. So wanted to tell you something funny today. So I was trying to understand how can Midjourney do better diagrams. The point of that was, can I train Midjourney to do my diagrams? Because I get these ideas, flashes of idea to draw this, and then somebody has to immediately draw, and I don't have an artist sitting next to me to say I'm going to draw it. So I thought Midjourney can do it. And I honestly, I said it, I was trying to remember in the last discussion I had to say that females had more long COVID than males. So I said to Midjourney to make a female figure, and I went to the other prompts that other writers were giving, and there was a prompt that says octane like rendering, and so it renders beautifully. So I said beautiful female figure with octane rendering. Man, do you know we have spoiled the AI as well. It really can, you can, I think you can imagine what kind of figure it made. So I just became, I wanted to post it on Reddit and say, you guys have spoiled our AI too. Okay, so I should probably ask a different prompt as well. So we just answered this one. So Ray Kinney says, glycation of erythrocytes passing through capillaries in brain, sildenafil dilation relief therapy possible. So we can, but that would cause a lot of other dilatations in the remaining blood as well. I think more important is to, yeah, mechanically, yes, it would help. So generally, from a mechanism point of view, yes. Good question, though. I like it. The mechanism tricking or tickling questions. Ray says other comorbidities not seemingly recognized as such, for example, body burden of lead or fasting glucose elevated. You're correct. Glucose elevations are recognized, but lead is not. So Alicia says, who is Abu Bean? I just got a notification, then I got a friend request and accepted. No idea. And please be careful. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here. So these were good questions. Cynthia says gut lung axis from a microbiome. The Dr. Sabine talked about that too. The breath odor tells about nearly different system illnesses. Yes, and not only this, but there can be they can be part of the smells coming from the stomach, and for example helicobacter pylori, etc. But yes, you're correct. Maybe we should request Dr. Hasan to come back once more and discuss this. KC says biases in healthcare is a recognized issue that takes many forms and has different groups as targets. Lots of articles and studies identifying problems, but nothing on solutions. How can someone combat negative biases from a medical provider in a way to achieve a positive outcome? This is the $1 million question. I don't think there is a solution. I'm so sorry. I'm usually positive. My whole life's mission is to improve patient care by educating better and from the younger ages. And so, you know, my work. The biggest disappointment I developed during this pandemic is that there are providers who do not even bother to look at some mechanisms if they just don't care for these, or if they have developed this feeling that these are incorrect, for example about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or something else. And I feel that propaganda through the mainstream media not only impacts the common people, but that impacts healthcare workers as well. So that propaganda actually keeps healthcare workers in line of thinking that big pharma wants. And the result is, so can you imagine, this is why I wanted to do that talk about buck stops nowhere. Can you imagine this, that for a healthcare worker, think about it for a second. For a healthcare worker, first of all, they have to become convinced to say, I'm going to be open minded enough to look at this concept. So, first, they have to get past their own resistance. And we all have resistances, biases. Then they have to get past the resistance or the firewall created by media. Media is such a horrendous, I want to curse here, for healthcare workers. And I'm sure their behavior is the same for other industries too. That they create narrative that is created in unison with big pharma. That narrative is propagated like, those loudspeakers that you use and go out, and that becomes another firewall. Third, based on these narratives and push, then the organizations, unfortunately more in the US, the American Medical Association and the state medical licensing boards and the hospital boards, and every place there is some controlling authority sitting, choking the people's throats to say, you can do this and you cannot do that. And if you can do what we are saying, we will protect you from people's um, um, litigious behavior, and will protect you from getting sued and getting responsible for a lot of things. And then if you didn't do what we are doing, not only you're exposed to people, but we will also chase you to take your licenses away or to defame you or to badmouth you. So that is the third mechanism by which these healthcare workers have to actually be brave enough to go through that. And when they're going to be brave enough to go through that, they have to be very, very clear that this can mean my career is over. And I sometimes find it very strange that people sometimes leave a comment that doctors should be brave enough to do the right thing. Doctors are humans as well. Nurses are humans as well. They have their lives and their families and their livelihoods. You're asking them to just drop everything because they want to make a statement that, hey, ivermectin might work. And then as a result of that, lose their license, for example, or their practice. Now, the question is, fine, let's say a doctor becomes brave enough to say that. When they lose the license, when they lose the practice, when they lose their financial well-being, would you then just go and award them that, hey, congratulations for your homelessness because you said this brave thing? Nobody's going to go make them whole. It is now they having to fight for themselves. So majority will not even take that risk. So that is the next level of the risk that a doctor has to go through. And then finally, if they decide that they have to do all of this, you know that the knowledge, the education, where is the right education? They don't know. Who is saying the right thing? I can tell you right now, for example, if you take COVID as an example, every one person who is standing here, sitting here, has things to the right of their belief system and things to the left of their belief system. They are the center in their own belief system. And then there are things too extreme on the right for them and then too extreme on the left. How do we judge who is correct? For example, somebody who says that 5G is the one that is responsible for all of this. They are centered in their belief. How do we say that is correct or not correct? So even for a doctor, they don't have time to do this research among so much noise and disgusting set of concepts that have been added in the system, that now they have to, every one of the doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals and workers have to go figure out what is the right one. This is where the lack of leadership comes in, where the leadership decided not to educate their people. Instead, the leadership themselves are busy mocking and doing the vengeful things for the messages that are maybe counter to their message. And we can actually see that these decisions that they had made continue to be proven wrong or childish or ill-informed. So doctor has to, so I have been sitting here for 2 years with you. I think in medicine, the only other person I could say who has also studied similarly, maybe MedCram's Dr. Sahult. Otherwise, every presenter you may have seen, they have a specific leaning. They're trapped in their own little pigeonhole where they are just doing a little, they may be liked by a lot of people, but still they're doing a disservice to medicine because they're intentionally, deliberately moving in a direction. So how many doctors have the advantage of doing this discussion or the advantage of having a person helping them with this? I remember there was a discussion with a doctor a couple of months ago. So she reached out, or we reached out to her for a business discussion, and we were on Zoom. And she said, the amount of knowledge that you are dispersing, and again, that knowledge doesn't come from inside of me. I go and learn it and then present it. She said, if someone was able to give us bi-weekly a lowdown of what is the current status, what should be included in our practice, she said, I would be ready to pay $1,000 a month for such a person. And I can understand if she banks on a big pharma's representative and say, all right, you educate me, that guy or gal is only going to tell her about their medicines. Is there a neutral party sitting somewhere educating the doctors for this, at least for this COVID and COVID related specialty? So I'm so sorry. Your question is, Casey, such a beautiful question. There is no, as much as my work has been, let's say, not as big as many others, still, this work has a secret in it, and that is the mechanisms and their explanations. And not only that, anchored in studies and textbooks. This is very important. You can find studies of all types, connecting them to textbooks as well, so that we make sure that as much of the accuracy to genuine healthcare sciences can be provided. Very few people have done that. I cannot actually imagine anyone who has done that with this level. Somebody was talking with me today and saying, who was this person? I had this discussion today. They were saying that the COVID has become a bigger specialty than many other disease specialties. And you are all COVID specialists. So, anyways, it's a good question, Casey. CC says, what are the differences between the COVID spikes in a vaccinated, boosted person versus the spike acquired in a COVID infection in an unvaccinated person who does not have the systemic mRNA in a cell? So, very good question, and good that you asked, because I wanted to answer this question for some time. Many people have reached out to me when we talk about vaccines or others, because some people think I'm a pro vaccine person and they want to show their displeasure. Some people think I'm an anti vaccine person and they want to show their displeasure. For example, a few days ago, someone on Twitter said to me, why are anti vaxxers and religious fanatics in your group? And I felt that, who are you to judge people? How did you get the certificate of saying I can call this person anti vaxxer and that person a religious fanatic? They're all human beings trying to figure out what is the right thing for them, and they're gathering around somewhere where they can get their information. So let's say this is a spike protein. Let me go back to the question for a second. I want to draw this as well. So here the question was, what are the differences? So let's say this is a spike protein from the virus. This question or comment from many people, that they say, you know what, vaccine spike protein is a different type. That is why it is more dangerous. Because inside their own thinking, they're thinking, hey, I'm going to get infected and I don't want to have a vaccine. You could still blame vaccine for other things. For example, it has adjuvants. The main difference of some vaccines compared to original spike protein is that there is a locking mechanism that may be an additional modification. But think about it for a second. The point of a vaccine is to train our immune system to learn to attack the virus. So imagine if my hand with 5 fingers is the virus's hand. And if you go to my body and show it my foot to say that when the virus comes in, it is going to look like this foot, and the virus actually looks like the hand, then the training has gone wrong. So our training has to make sure that we offer a pattern, a set of epitopes that can be seen on the virus. So we cannot just go invent something and say, well, this is a vaccine. However, there is this one change. Secondly, the messenger RNA that is used, some of that messenger RNA's material, adenosine and cytosine and uracil type things, some of those are further modified. They are modified so that they do not degrade very fast, and they can survive in the cell for some days so that they can continue to be used by ribosomes to continue to make spike proteins. But I would say it once more, you cannot tell the body that, hey, this is how a spike protein looks like, So imagine this is the pattern you gave to the body. You said this is spike protein, and the actual spike protein that came in with the virus is this way. Now we are done, because our cells got trained to recognize this, while the actual thing is this, and we are stuck. And this is what is happening with the mutations, that we tell the cell to recognize this, and let's say the spike is actually like this, but the virus mutates it and makes it like this. Now we are stuck. But generally, a spike protein produced by the vaccine versus by the virus have to be 99% similar to be able to be recognized. There are these kind of modifications which are necessary to have a more reliable, durable response. This is possible that the modified nuclear material, sorry, not nuclear, genetic material, can have its own bad outcomes, and the adjuvants can have their bad outcomes. And even the spikes, in some people, spikes are going to cause injury, like in COVID, similarly in the vaccine as well, because of the molecular mimicry and because of the autoimmune disruptions. So this was a very good question, CC. Kathleen, did you ever order a Sumatra coffee at Starbucks, and did you like it or not? So I did order that. So I went in as my regular time in the morning. I said I need a coffee, and I want to have Sumatra coffee. They said, well, we make that on a special order. You either have to wait or we can just give you pike. I said, okay, give me pike. And I took it and I came back. So I did order. It didn't work. Um, Adi Bean says, MTHFR gene mutation. Doctors are still telling patients it isn't real. Can you explain the mutations? And so I actually intend to do a lecture. Why? Because Dr. Paul Marek from FLCCC asked me that, hey, can you do a talk on this? So I'm going to do that. Hopefully next week I'll do that. This week for FLCCC, I'm also going to do the Zoe app long COVID talk. Next week, I'm planning to do the MTHFR talk. So give me time for that. If I go back here, let's see if there are more questions. I'm going to start from the end. Moose Lodge says, which version of COVID do you think everyone is getting right now? In my community, it is 15%. So strange that no one is talking about it. Thank you. 15% meaning what? Meaning Omicron or something else? I thought that dominant is Omicron. So MSNBC says, why can't I show this? Wasn't there a Swedish study stating problems with nanoparticles? What is the true safety of Novavax? So one, the nanoparticle itself of the Novavax is a particle with the spike proteins. Their study, I think I talked about that as well, was that the lipid nanoparticle may have a exosomal type behavior. So I did that. This is a different nano. It's not a lipid nanoparticle. Is this the discussion happening? John is saying, Texas Mag, anyone who promotes ice cream, ice cream is not a propagandist, more like a spreader of love. Okay, send me ice cream. Uh, we are cooking today with very good questions. Ray Kinney says, if fact checkers can't seem to have any facts, what should they be called? Checkers? Path is laughing about Path. What are you smiling about? Casey says, thank you for your perspective. Much appreciated. You're very welcome. I stopped myself because we were going to do the questions, and that is a talk I can keep talking for 2 hours for the anomalies in the system and deliberate poop that is being mixed in this whole beautiful machine of our healthcare system. It has its faults, but this money is such a strange thing, that this pandemic became an opportunity for some companies, and they took that opportunity. That is true. Doctors can review Mubin's work for nothing to get updated on COVID. And that is the thing. First, they have to go past their own bias, that there can be something out there that I should look at. I can tell you a friend of mine who is who has always admired my teaching because he studied some of that from me as well. He was from a different college, who have been studying some of those now as well. When I called him for just, hey, how are you doing? And I very proudly said, I said, have you watched some of my videos on COVID? And he chuckled. And I could, over the phone, I could see the smirk on his face. And I said, oh man, even when he knows me and admires what I do and knows I don't do bullshitting in my talks, even then he was not able to get past his own thinking that COVID related talks are useless. COVID is a virus that doesn't have a solution. Let the people be at home for 6 7 days. If they become severe, go to hospital, we'll give you steroids and oxygen, and that's about it. This is as simple the things are for them. And I since then I have never banked on a doctor or a nurse actually opening up. So those who are opening up, because I get many stranger doctors and nurses reaching out and saying, your educational material helped me save so many people from misery or from death, and I'm grateful for this. There are nowadays a new wave of doctors who are reaching out, who are general practitioners, saying, you are helping me so much with my practice, that it is unfortunate that people cannot open up. JLB says, what you told about the healthcare profession could not be better described. I saw many times that here. Yes, and I stopped because there were even more anomalies. Parth is, this is very correct. Silence is the best answer to someone who doesn't value your words. Silence is a very good answer. That is correct, Eric. Heart murmurs can be heard with Littman. For a trained ear, they can be heard with just putting the ear on the chest or by any stat. Okay, so seems like the questions here are octane rendering, a um, more kind of beautified rendering, more realistic type rendering. But man, the I think some of you can imagine the kind of figure it drew to say, here is a beautiful woman's figure. Rand says, in your last talk, did the data include BA4 and 5? No. So they stopped at Feb 10. The BA4 and 5 were declared variants of concern on May, in May, but they were present in the UK earlier, but they were lesser. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and keep answering the questions. CC, can the neurological effects on the brain and nervous system increase with each booster? Yes. What are the top 5 most important things to do or take immediately after testing positive? Lisa, you want this channel to be shut down? So we know hydration is very important. We know IV is very important. We know that keeping your vitamins correct is very important. What I have seen is too much vitamins attack on the body is also not right. So correct doses of vitamin, and then skipping a day is very important. I've seen chicken soup is very interesting, or any nutritious soups are very, very interesting. Um, we have done this discussion uh, before as well. Prone positioning, although now there are studies that say prone positioning, prone breathing doesn't work, but it works very well. Bay Area's Aquarius says, I am interested in dental health around the world, comparisons in theories and best practices, and maybe even diet's role. Physical anthropology labs and seeing remains always left me fascinated at the health of teeth of certain people of the world. You are very correct. And we should maybe request Nipa to have this discussion with us. I'm not kidding. I saw a picture of a person with a very big tooth, and I became very curious that why does he have this huge tooth? And it turned out it was not a huge, it was all plaque, and he was just not, he had not taken care of his teeth. Majority of them had fallen out. The one that were left were so big because of the plaques on them. So yes. Randolph Prince says, I hope it's okay to add another different question this week. For boosters, it was mentioned that boosting with the original vaccine now has only short term effectiveness because it just gives a kick, activates the immune system. Antibodies are not well matched to Omicron. If that's all it does, then how about using a different vaccine, one we might already have experiences with, such as the flu vaccine? Wouldn't that give your system a kick? Or how about just an adjuvant? Or a very, very good question. So it does give a kick, but it gives the kick to the right uh, cells. The thing is this. This is a beautiful question. Couple of answers to this one. Imagine an army of cells sitting somewhere, all with their hands extended. And they all have a different kind of a hand. And they're all in this little Zen like state, saying, I'm your guy, I'm here. Right? B cells, T cells. When we send an antigen, or when an antigen arrives without us sending it, it has to fit one of these things, the binding sites, to activate that cell. So when we say that we are kicking the immune system into high gear, it is not that just any cell should just start becoming active. Because once this, let's say, let's call them A, B, and C. Let's say that the cell C has a binding region that is good for spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. If we activate cell A, it will become activated. The whole immune system with it will become activated, but the cell A would only generate, if I can replicate this little thing that I drew, and release antibodies that has this binding site. Similarly, only those T cells would become active that has this binding site. Now, imagine if the virus comes in and the virus's binding site is, or sites are of this type, then this active cell has no benefit. Yes, we are kicking the cells in activity, but we still have to kick the right crowd of the cells. And so for that, we have to send the correct antigen so that the cells that bind with that antigen, they become active. In addition to that, you saw this from the Novavax's, I loved this one, Novavax's presentation over this FDA discussion, FDA meeting 2 or 3 days ago, where they said that imagine we have this spike protein from the ancestor, right? And they said, imagine some part of this is actually different now. Let's say Omicron has made this part different throughout the other variations. They said, even then, if we keep giving ancestral antigen, what will happen is it will keep adding to the repertoire of kind of antibodies we can produce. For example, let's say the first time you give the vaccine dose, or consider the first time the infection occurs, we make antibodies that are bindable here, and let's say here, and that's it. These work. And so we are done. When this is given again, this vaccine, these two would work, but maybe this time this antigen would go and connect with another cell that can bind here. So now we have another set of antibodies that may be produced. And maybe next time we give one more dose and we can cover this area too. So they said that as you give more doses, the distance between the new variant and the original keeps becoming shrunken. What they meant was that there are just more and more variety of antibodies being produced with each exposure, that the same ancestral antigen can allow enough kind of antibodies to be produced that even Omicron can be covered with that. That was an interesting take on it, and I was amused. It's a good question. Let's see how many more questions. Okay, more questions. Who is this 111 says, I'm hearing more and more about functional mushrooms. Okay, so I will do a mushroom talk separately. I like this question. Randolph, I do not know if YouTube allows mushroom discussion. Randolph Prince says, would you please explain the mechanism behind stress-induced dementia and whether the kind of dementia is permanent? Okay, very good question. Stress-induced dementia can be for many reasons. Let's look at this as well. This is Alzheimer's Society and there. So basically, many reasons. So let's say this is a brain tissue. I always not make brain in the right proportions. This is not the right proportion, so my apologies. Okay, so first thing, we just being distracted because of stress would cause the brain's function to be different. So for example, you're thinking about thing A and somebody is asking you about thing B. You may not be able to respond correctly. So it would look like temporary dementia, and that would go away when the stress goes away. But bigger problems are when stress causes two main disruptions. One is immune system disruption, and we know how with the epinephrine, norepinephrine. And second is the cortisol release. So immune system disruption because of epi, norepi, right? And the even cortisol, glucagon, these all cause immune system disrupted. When the immune system is disrupted, then the brain also has a disrupted immune system with incorrect taking care of the garbage inside the brain tissues, cells. So that would cause damage to the cell or less cleanliness within the cell, which within the brain, which would then cause dementia like symptoms. And if we don't improve that situation, then this would become permanent. Same is the case with the cortisol as well, that cortisol would go and affect the brain negatively as well, but if it is in the short term, it will become okay. But if it just stays, if somebody is in a continuous state of stress, then in the long run, they would end up damaging the brain. They would also end up damaging their heart. So if somebody, for example, I'll give you my example. Few months ago, or maybe last year's middle, when the complaints were going crazy, meaning people were just going after even sending police to my home to say, go check Mubin's home, he's doing something illegal there. I would wake up every morning with palpitations. And what would happen is that when palpitations mean that there is this stress and there is this norepinephrine and epinephrine, and heart is irritated and it is working more, and hormones are kicking it to say work more. What would happen is that heart would start adapting itself and it would remodel its cells. eventually to a point where now it gets the palpitations and you cannot stop it. It just keeps getting palpitations, or it would trigger palpitations whenever it wants. That means if I stayed in that state for longer time, I might have my later age years, mired with cardiac problems. So that is the same thing over here. If somebody is continuously in stress, and there is continuous problem with the inflammatory system, and there is continuous problem, inflammatory being immune system, and there is continuous problem with the cortisol or hormonal imbalances causing brain's functional imbalances, that would end up causing dementia that might become permanent. So this is a good article to read as well. I never knew that discussing medicine can become so taxing in so many ways, but I am happy that I didn't give up, and here we are. So Randolph Prince, so thank you very much. Good question. Patty Zig says, what is the exact mechanism that causes osteoporosis in post-menopausal women? I never quite fully know. This is a good question to have a good discussion. So in relation, are calcium supplements helpful, or can they cause hypercalcemia and calcium buildup in arterial walls? There seems to be some division on this. So let me actually take a note of this one. This is a very important area. So just give me, I want to take notes of these 2-3 topics that I said I'll do. So mushrooms, functional mushrooms, that is one. Then osteoporosis, it just crashed 1 second. When I am sharing my screen, mushrooms and relaying. So should be someone actually in the talk who should collect these to-dos. What else was there? There was something else as well. Yes, MTHFR, or cysteine, homocystinuria, methionine, MTHFR. I have to do that as well for COVID issues. Okay, so that's a good question. I'll do that, Patty. And then Rima Van Hilseel says, for the majority of people who are vaccinated, no immune compromise, what's the thought process when it comes to deciding to boost and when? If one had COVID and did okay, how would that be considered? Is age a factor? Is over 60 versus 40? Are there talking point considerations? Are these tests we can take that understand a level of natural immunity? So I'm assuming that this discussion is within the context of the COVID. And this is the last question here as well. So I just answered one part of this question before that. For example, Novavax said every booster would create a new repertoire, an additional repertoire of antibodies that can attach to other parts of the spike protein. So the protection would keep becoming better. The question is, the risk of side effects would continue, or injury will be there too. So now the question to really answer is, if the person is infected, what are the possibilities, the risks of long COVID or COVID related injuries, versus if they take more of the vaccine, what are the risks of that? The good news is that as we age, our immune system is not as aggressive in responding. So even when the boosters are taken, usually they do not cause that much of a harm because the immune system doesn't react that badly. And so they can still get away with not too much of injury, but there can be people who are injured. So I think age is a factor, and above 60, it is interesting to see that do they need to be boosted. The question now would be, if they are Omicron infected, if they were infected before as well, if the infected before was horrible, was difficult, then maybe a booster would help. But if it was like piece of cake, there was no issues, then yes, there is a chance of long COVID, and they can think about that. So that is the basic. Maybe, as you have been saying, Rima, from ever, to put together a flow chart, we should do that. Okay, so this is the so which is why they seem to give points for diagnosing Cushing's. Yes. MSNBC says, I wonder how you find out what the people in other countries are saying about Novavax. So I think that there are some data coming out for the Novavax. So I'll look into that. So with this, let's break for today. I hope we did a great job with the questions. Please like, subscribe, and share. There are links in the description that if you like, you can buy Dr. Bean or buy me a coffee or PayPal, whichever way you like. Have a happy long weekend. Happy 4th of July in advance. I'll see if I can come back on 4th of July and do a talk. Otherwise, see you on 5th. Thank you very much. Bye bye.